Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Unnext News Radio podcast, your news source for all things unexplained. And now, here's your host for the Unnext News podcast, Margie K.
Well, good evening, everyone. Looks like we've had some audio issues there, but uh-oh. I am having everything repeat, Race.
Then you've got a browser open somewhere.
Okay. All right. It stopped. It stopped.
Okay, there you go.
Yeah. Okay. I am your host, Margie K. Welcome to Unnext News Radio and podcast. We have some new things coming up. As I mentioned last month, we have Unnext News Magazine is going to be returning in October. It is a quarterly magazine, and I know you're going to love it because we talk about all things unexplained. We have some really great articles and really good writers that have got some really interesting stuff. And I want to mention, as you know, I've got several books out, but my most recent one is this one, Winged Aliens. And this is a theory that winged cryptid creatures are aliens and or interdimensional beings. And that is available on Amazon right now. And this evening, coincidentally, we are going to be discussing winged creatures and specifically Mothman. I have a very special guest this evening, Lon Strickler. And now I am having some issues, so let me just bring this up. Lon Strickler will discuss the Mothman sightings in the greater Chicago area and beyond this evening. Lon is a Fortean researcher, author, and publisher of the syndicated Phantoms and Monsters blog. He began the blog in 2005, which has steadily grown in popularity and is read daily by tens of thousands of paranormal enthusiasts, investigators, and those seeking the truth. His research and reports have been featured on hundreds of online media sources. Several of these published reports have been presented on various television segments, including the History Channel's Ancient Aliens, Syfy's Paranormal Witness, Fact or Faked, Paranormal Files, and Destination America's Monsters and Mysteries in America. He's been interviewed on hundreds of radio and online broadcasts, including multiple guest appearances on Coast to Coast AM. He was also featured on Destination America's Monsters and Mysteries in America television show for the Sykesville Monster episode. I saw that one. That was great. Lon has written 8 books and is currently the host of Arcane Radio on Beyond Explanation YouTube channel. Welcome to the program, Lon.
Margie.
It's great to have you this evening. As my audience knows, I am a researcher and investigator of winged creatures of all types. And as I read your blogs and see your newsletters, I see that obviously you are very dedicated to the subject as well. And you have done an enormous amount of work and study. And I'd just like to know, let's just start with the Chicago area. What is going on there, and when did the Mothman sightings first start?
Well, the word Mothman is kind of a misnomer. The press dubbed it the Mothman. I actually started calling it the Phantom, the Chicago Phantom, because quite frankly, we didn't know what we were dealing with. But the sightings themselves, the ones that are more recent started 2011. There were 3 sightings in the end of that summer, all in South Chicago. They were quick sightings. There was 1 photograph taken, though I'm not sure if that was even one of the beings. It's pretty inconclusive. So The description overall was pretty similar to what people have been describing now, but what we're getting for the most part are a 5 to 6 foot being, sometimes a little bit bigger, very emaciated body, but humanoid, black in color for the most part. Sometimes it looks shiny, like it may be wet. Got legs, very small feet or pads. And the arms are very, very narrow as well. Sometimes they're attached to a wing, sometimes they aren't. The wings, for the most part, have been that of like a bat or a gargoyle. And the wingspan can range anywhere from 10 to 15 foot across. The head on these things have varied. Sometimes we get the head that seems to be buried into the body, like a Mothman. Many times those have the red eyes. As well, we have had sightings with a small, narrow head, some with red eyes, some without. So these sightings are very interesting for a lot of reasons, not only because, the shock of the witnesses, and by the time they realize something, what's going on, it's too fast, they're fleeting sightings. They don't get any opportunity to get a camera out, take a photograph of it. But these beings, the ones that have been seen on the ground, have the ability to accelerate quickly into the air without even flapping their wings. Now, there have been some who have used the wings, but for the most part, that has not happened. We've had a few encounters on the ground, but most of the sightings have been in the air, but mostly pretty close to the witnesses. And, this was going on since most of these, the biggest flap has been going on since the spring of 2017. Now, there have been some wing variations early. We had one in the Oz Park area, which had like an insectoid wing-like structure. And a few others in the Humboldt Park area and other areas that had like an owl wing, a feathered wing, and the face of an owl and red eyes. I think we had overall 3 or 4 of those in the city. We've had some outside the city as well. But for the most part, it's been the membrane-like wings. And we've even had people describe these things as looking like a gargoyle and looking like the character on the Jeepers Creepers movies. And
I've heard that as well.
Yeah.
I've had witnesses use that term.
Well, it's it's something that people are familiar with, and I think they kind of associate it with something like that. So yeah, we do. In fact, in my first book, I wrote a whole chapter on Jeepers Creepers, and had it come how it originated, and then the sightings that were the witnesses actually described as being that. Now, since October 2019. Most of the sightings, I'd say 80% of the sightings, have been around O'Hara International and Rosemont, which is the suburb east of the airport. And more recently, most of the sightings have been in a specific area around the airport on the western side near the cargo areas and the Rest Haven Cemetery. There is a cemetery on O'Hara.
How recent was that?
2 weeks ago. It was
that's recent.
It was reported to us 2 weeks ago. Plus, we're still getting sighting reports from the same incident, and but it actually happened on July 22nd. This particular sighting was first witnessed by United Cargo workers who had been coming out of the office at 10:30. And happened to see it up against the fence with several TSA agents and supervisors from their carrier and another carrier out there with it. And what they observed is this thing taking off into the air and just flying about and going over the fence and flying about above them. We had also had sightings from cargo workers at United and at FedEx. The FedEx guys called it in. They're the ones that made the initial report. I wish they would have actually tried to take a photograph. From what I was told, or what we were told, they were just so shocked at what they were seeing. They thought they were seeing a demon. So they were not going to take a photograph. So these supervisors came and, they brought the TSA with them. And now we had another guy who was driving near the bend in the road where the fence is, because this fence is right in front of the tarmac. And he got out to take a photograph. And as he pulled his camera up, TSA agent yelled at him and told him to get the hell in the car and get out of there. Not, he was ready to take a picture, but he didn't do it. So he didn't follow through with it.
Right.
But all in all, we've had, I'd say, at least 7 or 8 witnesses. We got another statement that's going to be published probably tomorrow or the day after, and another one from another witness of the same incident. So this is the biggest incident out there so far.
Have any of the witnesses said that their superiors told them to keep quiet about this and not discuss it?
And that's been going on now since all these sightings have been going on at the airport. I've got an inside source at the airport who is actually a supervisor for one of the carriers. They have been telling me since I started talking to them about a year ago, and they've been telling me of all the rumors and all the talk with her people and others around the terminal who have been seeing this thing. There has been a lot of sightings, but people are afraid to come forward because, quite frankly, some of the carrier supervisors warned them that they will lose their jobs. Our team, the Phantoms and Monsters Fortean research team, has been named as, the group not to report to, because we've been thoroughly going over this, and we're handling the bulk of the reports. So they have told them not to contact us, but we've been lucky enough to still have people come forward. We guarantee confidentiality, and and we stick by that.
Mm-hmm.
We've had other witnesses out there, professional witnesses. We had 2 TSA security people contact us. We had one of 2 airline pilots contact us. This thing flew right over in front of the cockpit.
Oh my!
And we had an air traffic controller contact us. Him and his buddies were out on a smoke break, and this thing was outside the terminal. So we're getting some pretty reliable witnesses. And
what about the security cameras? They've got to have them.
Yeah, but that's TSA and the O'Hare management, and we have filed FOIA request.
Mm-hmm.
And with the Great Lake regional office of the FAA, and they're not giving us anything. We haven't had anything at all come back other than there were no reports, no sightings, nothing, no security, nothing. So,
do any of your witnesses also have they had UFO sightings? Have they had any paranormal things going on besides this?
Not that I can determine. Yeah, I mean, it's no prerequisite or anything to where they have had a history of making reports. That, and we've been checking this out pretty closely. When I first started the team back in 2017, I had 2 of the individuals that worked on the team following up with the reports. We had Tobias Whalen, who's with Singular Fortean Society, and Rosemary Allen Guiley, who was still alive at that time. She was actually following up with all the witnesses, and eventually that year she did a presentation at the Mothman Festival in Point Pleasant. So she was deeply involved with our investigation.
Goodness. The descriptions that you gave earlier that the witnesses talk about, the type of wings, the head, that in fact it's all black. I hear that over and over again in the greater Kansas City area as well. And as you know, I've got over 100 reports from this area since 2011. Now, what happened in 2011 and coming forward that I don't understand. I know investigators all over the country, and there are some sporadic areas where there's been a single sighting, but not groups of clusters of sightings like Chicago and Kansas City. And I know Point Pleasant is still having sightings in their area today.
Yeah, I get
why do you think that is?
Well, you mentioned your book and the theory of interdimensional beings and extraterrestrial. We've had extraterrestrial involvement in some of these sightings. In other words, a gray would be seen or some type of other humanoid. We had a UFO literally hovering over the western section of the airport about 2 years ago, right over top the Rest Haven Cemetery. And a humanoid of some type actually ascended into the craft. So this is, we're getting some involvement of something other than just these winged beings. We've had other humanoid sightings around the area, those without wings, mostly in Rosemont and some of the green areas that, Chicago is pretty well known for these long green stretches of land, and people go in there for recreation and ride their bikes and jog and stuff, and some of the sightings have come for them as well, and they're just so shook up. I asked them if they have seen wings. No, just some strange looking humanoid like thing, so I think there's definitely an involvement there. Now, as far as why it's opening up, we've been doing some metaphysical work more lately, and we're starting hopefully to get some answers that may answer this, but who knows. There was a situation outside of Chicago in Cook County at the Fermi Labs back in and I think it was 2011, but there was supposedly an accident at the accelerator. That accelerator at Fermi is the oldest accelerator in the world. Supposedly when this accident occurred, they shut the thing down. Now, I've had people staked out in that area for years now and are being told that there's still a lot of activity. And in fact, the news in recent months has reported that they are literally doing a lot of work there. I think they have put in another accelerator, an upgrade. So was it when there was an accident, it opened something up? I don't know. Is it still
like
open?
A portal?
Well, a rift between dimensions, if anything. It might not necessarily be a portal or a vortex, but there's something opened up. As well, we have started remote view sessions on the airport grounds, particularly around the cemetery. And from what we can tell, there are at least 3 ley lines that actually intersect on that cemetery. So, of course, they extend out past the city into other areas. And, these sightings have been as far as 250 miles from the center of Chicago, Indiana, all of Illinois, and, most of Illinois, then, the southern central part of Wisconsin. We've had a few over across the lake, too, in Michigan. So the activity overall is pretty spread out, but the sightings have been pretty similar. And so this is more of a regional phenomena. We call it the Chicago, Lake Michigan Mothman, or whatever you want to call this thing. But it's a regional phenomena, and it's continuing. I mean, right now we have 129 reports that we believe are valid. We've had far more than that, but you get some that you just don't get enough information from the witness where you can actually believe that it was actually a valid sighting, and we just ignore those. Even though there might have been something, I don't post it as part of the investigation. So I'm trying to get the cleanest information, cleanest evidence that we can get.
Have you had any reports of pterodactyls? I have a number from witnesses who swear that it cannot be anything else, that it is definitely a pterodactyl. And if so, what do you think is going on there?
The pterosaur sightings, pterodon sightings have been going on for centuries, especially out in the western part of the United States. But more recent years, there seem to be more and more sightings from Mexico north into central part of the United States up into the upper Midwest. There has been a few very well-known sightings, like the Van Meter visitor. Yeah. That was definitely a pterodon. I mean, and this thing was actually
2 of them.
It was actually seen by witnesses in a cave not far out of the Iowa town.
Mm-hmm.
So, but that whole area of Iowa, Wisconsin, Illinois, and it is well known for flying cryptids for years. And even the indigenous people that lived there, even drew paintings and stuff of them and talked about them in their lore.
Yeah.
But in more modern day, there have been sightings even into Indiana, Thunderbird or pterodon. So, and the descriptions, you're right. The descriptions are that of a long-beaked, prehistoric type bird, huge, big bird. And and those sightings continue.
Yeah, I have drawings by some witnesses, and it absolutely can't be anything else. The one thing about going back to the Mothman for a minute, that I find very interesting in some of these sightings where the creature is standing on the ground and then just goes up in the air and they don't flap their wings.
Mm-hmm.
I find that extremely odd. How many cases like that have you had?
A lot. Yeah, they seem to be able to maneuver without using the wings. Some of those have been right downtown. I mean, we've had sightings of these things early on that would be flying without flapping their wings along the river. A lot of people say, well, you got drones or persons in squirrel suits or something to that effect. Well, these things were going up and under bridges and, circling around. I mean, nothing that a drone could do, and especially a person in a squirrel suit, that just isn't going to happen. They don't call it the Windy City for nothing. I mean, you're in a squirrel suit jumping off a building in Chicago. You're going to either be on the ground or you're going to be up against a building. So, you're not going to be able to do that.
Yeah.
And we've talked to experts and people who actually do this, who absolutely discount it at hand. I mean, that nobody in their right mind is going to do that. So I'm pretty sure, even from the descriptions and what people have told us, that these are actual flesh and blood beings. They may very well be interdimensional. I do believe they are, because, and I think there's many of them as well. I don't think it's just one that has come through. Early on, I thought there were at least 3 of them, and it may very well be more than that or less than that now. I don't know. But, there have been some slight variations as to what they look like. But overall, it's about the same thing. And, I've said a long time now that the Mothman of Point Pleasant was actually a being, but it was a summoned being. And when I mean summoned being, because of the strong indigenous energy around that area, in particular the West Virginia Ordnance Works, what people call a TNT plant. I have been there. I have heard some of the EVPs that come out of there. I've felt some of the energy. I'm intuitive, and it's palpable when you go in there. I believe, because that area had a lot of teenagers and young adults hanging around, disturbing the energy, that it actually summoned a guardian or a sentinel, and that turned out to be the Mothman.
That makes sense. That does make sense. And people they know the name Mothman, and of course the Mothman Prophecies book, but it really doesn't look like a Mothman at all. It looks more like a humanoid with bat wings, right?
Yeah, technically, yeah.
So Batman might be more appropriate, but everyone calls it that, so we'll stick with it. Oh, gosh. So what other types of cryptid investigations have you worked on? And I'm especially interested in the Wolfman sightings.
Yeah, in particular, the upright canine sightings. We've kind of been exclusive, though we will take reports anywhere. But we've really been looking into the phenomena here in Pennsylvania. And since 2013, 2014, we have been closely monitoring myself and Butch Witkowski, who's one of my original members. And we've been looking at this phenomenon pretty tightly. And actually, other than the historical sightings, which we have accumulated as far back as the mid 18th 1800s. Areas in Pennsylvania and some of the areas maybe 50 miles around, some of the neighboring states, in particular Maryland. Maryland has had a long history of what they call Dwayyo sightings of these upright canines that a lot of the old German folks from the farmers from the old world would call either some type of werewolf, but they started using the name Dwayyo. And we've had a lot of those sightings. Frederick County, Maryland is very ripe as far as those type of sightings. But in Pennsylvania, since 2013, we have accumulated about 29 sightings from very, very good witnesses, very forthright witnesses. And of those, I'd say that most of the sightings that were within the past 7 or 8 years, I'd say we had about 20 of those. Now, most of these people were hunters. They had guns and, but just like, when people talk about Bigfoot and possible infrasound and the ability to make a person either back away or feel like it's, I don't know, some type of psychic connection somehow. I think these upright canines and the dogman, the quadrupeds, I think they have that same ability. We've had many instances where a hunter, either a hunter that was doing upland game with a shotgun or in there with a deer rifle, none of them took a shot at this thing. And, but the one thing about these beings is it stands its ground. And they're huge.
Yes.
The overall height of these beings goes anywhere from 8 to 10 foot in height. And they look like, if you know what the Underworld series on movies look like with the lichens, very similar to that. And in fact, many of the witnesses have pointed to those characters in those movies as looking just like these things. Very thick chest, thin waist, very muscular with the wolf head and the thick legs. That's what we're getting.
Are all the sightings in the woods?
No.
Okay,
there have been some in the field, some out in fields and such. Most are in the woods. The one overriding factor that is kind of interesting, it's always near either a state park, a national forest, or in a Pennsylvania state game land. They're always nearby somehow. But there have been a lot of sightings in the game lands, and I think that a lot of that has to do with actual food. These game lands, they take very good care of it, and it's conducive to a lot of wildlife. So
conservation areas is what we call them here. I had a witness who had a very bizarre thing happen. She was in communication with a Sasquatch client, and they were allowing her to get closer and closer to them and showing themselves to her, and she would just go out and take pictures, and they allowed her to take pictures. And one day she did take a picture, and when she got home, she was going through her camera, and she saw two Sasquatch holding back a wolfman creature with his fangs showing, and it took two huge Sasquatch to hold him back, but she didn't see it with the naked eye when she took the picture. Have you had any cases like that?
Yeah, these things, I think both these cryptids, either upright canines, dogman, or even the Bigfoot, have an ability to cloak themselves in some degree. There has been a phenomena that has been being seen in recent years, what we call the glimmer man. And basically what it is, if you've ever seen the Predator movies, where the alien has that kind of glassine look to it when it cloaks, we've been having sightings of that. And in fact, I do have a photograph of one of those, a couple photographs actually. And we believe that these are cloaked cryptids. Bruce Maccabee in particular had talked about seeing these things in the woods behind his place. I believe
Yes.
I believe they're real.
And his wife did.
Yeah, his wife too. Yeah, I believe this is absolutely real. We have no real proof. We have no real evidence of a manifestation of something coming from that state to another. But we might get lucky. We might have a camera trap or someone catch one of these things at one point. We had an interesting photograph come from Salt Fork State Park from about a year ago. What looked like a Sasquatch leg and hip manifesting from thin air. So, and the rest of the body looked like it was like in that glassine type or glimmer effect. So, we're not sure if that's what it was, but,
well, yeah. And you hear lots of stories of people tracking, say, Bigfoot prints or maybe Dogman prints. I'm not sure what they are. They're just really big. They look canine, but they're not identifiable in the snow. Mm-hmm. And then they go to a certain point and then they're just not there anymore. And there was no place for them to go. What happened? That leans towards the idea that they're interdimensional.
Well, that phenomenon in particular is something we saw a lot of in the Navajo Nation in New Mexico and Arizona. J.C. Johnson used to live out there and investigate a lot of that area, and I'd see him tracking footprints, and all of a sudden the thing would stop, like it just vanished in thin air. Yeah, unless it's sprouting wings and taking off, there's something going on there. This is also what's going on in Chicago. We've had witnesses that literally have seen these things go in, flying into an invisible doorway and just suddenly disappear. Mm-hmm. We've also had people that have suddenly seen them appear in front of them. So, that you take what you got as far as evidence goes. It's all anecdotal, but it's pretty interesting when you get people who have no idea what's going on and see this and report it and, have no knowledge of previous sightings. And they tell you this.
It seems that there are a lot more sightings in the past few years. Is that the case, or is it just that more people are reporting it, or something else going on that we don't know, have an explanation for yet?
I guess you can look at both sides of the coin with that. There's a lot more paranormal shows, a lot more are tied to cryptid activity now. People don't seem to be as reluctant to make a report as they did before. Years and years ago, cryptid sightings were like pulling teeth. People literally would not tell you anything. And,
right.
It was hard to get a decent report unless a researcher had the actual incident or someone who was involved with the, with hunting for these creatures at an incident. But as far as the general public or those who, those civilians who had no knowledge or even cared about cryptid activity or monsters or whatever you want to call them, they'd have a sighting and then you'd find out about it 30 years later because they finally figured it's safe enough to come forward. We get a lot of very old cases that happens steadily.
Yeah.
So, as far as, I feel fortunate that we get new sightings. But like I said, I think people know that they can have their information kept confidential, and that they will, if they come forward, we will do as much as we can to keep it confidential and keep it between us. We guarantee that as well. You almost have to do that. You're not going to get, if you continue to release information, you're not going to be having people contact you. When you get a report, you're part of the report. So no matter how you look at it, I give persons the benefit of the doubt until I figure something else. If it isn't, or but I try to investigate every little thing that occurs. I'm lucky, really lucky, because not only because of the blog and then my name's out there and people can contact me, but I got a really good group of investigators that are working with the Phantoms and Monsters Fortean research team. We've got 20 plus investigators on the ground nationwide, as well as 15 affiliate groups. And when we do get a report, I will send it out to who's ever the closest and willing to go. And if I can't find anybody out of all those people, we're going to get a connection somewhere with somebody. So I try to get a fair majority of the reports looked at with investigators.
So how would a person file a report with you?
All they got to do is call me. Either call me or send me an email. And, if they do that, I will contact them. If they, if they leave a message or they leave the email, I'll contact them, talk to them, get as much information as I can. If I think it's a valid sighting, I will get someone to look into it.
So phantomsandmonsters.com is the website. And then tell me about your podcast.
Oh, Arcane Radio, which will be live tonight at 9:00 p.m. Eastern time. I've been doing this. I've been doing radio now since 2011. I was on Beyond the Edge and a few other channels and such. But Arcane Radio was started by Sean Forker and myself, and then Butch Wachowski came in on it. But more recent years, I've been doing it myself. So I guess about 3 years now I've been doing it myself. So currently we are on YouTube at beyondexplanation.com or Beyond Explanation on YouTube. It's best just to search it on YouTube. And we got several hosts for 5 different shows on there. And it's all, for the most part, cryptid related. And, we kind of look at the whole gamut. And of course, I do bring a lot of my investigators in these shows. We have a monthly Fortean Friday special where we investigate and talk about cases that the team has been working on. So we try to keep everybody up to date. And of course, all the cases are listed on either phantomsandmonsters.com or at cryptidhunters.org, which is the team website.
Okay. Now I've got a really odd question for you as far as cryptids go. Tiny winged creatures, fairy size, from teeny tiny, like less than an inch, up to about 10 inches. Do you have any of those cases?
You will get one. It's normally second-hand, third-hand sighting. Most of the sightings that I have been on are maybe older sightings or something that somebody finally came forward with. I can't, we've had little people sightings, and in fact, J.C. Johnson did an investigation when he was up in Minnesota of these little green fern people, whatever they were. But that's an area where there's a lot of Bigfoot and upright canine activity as well. Very near one of the Ojibwe reservations. And these indigenous folks knew about these beings. I mean, they were very, very tiny, and they were kind of greenish in color, and you'd see a head pop out of the ferns every once in a while, and we had a few photographs as well. So that's technically what I've been involved with. As far as other either fae, gnomes, duende, or whatever, that's something I will get once in a while. I haven't necessarily been involved with an actual case, but if it comes in and I believe it's valid, we'll look into it.
What's the most interesting cryptid case you've worked on?
Oh, I believe it'd have to be with the sightings in Chicago. I had a sighting of a winged humanoid very, very similar to what these beings are being seen in Chicago back in 1988 here in Pennsylvania. That was, I've been lucky enough to have 2 very interesting cryptid sightings. I had a Bigfoot sighting in 81, and I had a down in Maryland, and I had this winged humanoid sighting in Adams County, Pennsylvania, back in 88. So,
okay, well, I have to hear about both of those.
Okay. Well, The Bigfoot sighting was May of 1981. I was fly fishing in the South Branch Patapsco River. I used to use a fly rod to go bass fishing there. Area I've been at a lot. I mean, I had chest waders on. I was in the river, standing in the river. And on the far bank, which really wasn't that far away. I mean, the river there is not wide at all. And I saw a dog running around, mixed breed, large mixed breed dog that was kind of going in and out the weeds on the north bank. Didn't pay much attention. I continued fishing until I heard this dog yelp. And when I looked up, this thing stood up. And when it stood up, it was tall weeds, but I could see it from maybe mid chest up. And first thing I noticed was the hair, dark brownish hair, bizarre looking head. Never seen anything like that before in my life. Had no idea what I was looking at. This thing turned to its right, to my left, and walked out of the weeds. And as it did, it turned and looked at me. I was about 40, 50 foot away from it, not that much further. It looked like a typical Bigfoot, I suppose. I didn't know what it was back then. It looked more like a Neanderthal type being. I mean, like an early man. It had the really thick brow ridge on it. Had a conical head. Very muscular, about 8 foot in height. Definitely male. See the genitalia on it, but it was covered in hair. And this thing was making a ticking sound, which I later figured it was the gnashing its teeth. I've heard other reports of these things when they get nervous or when they're observing something, they may gnash your teeth. I don't know what kind of mechanism that is, and I also got a whiff of what smelled like fox urine, which I used to use to go deer hunting on my shoes. And it kind of smelled like that. We've had investigations where we actually thought that Bigfoot would mask their scent using either glands from other animals or even skunk, but I think that's what this came from. I'm not sure, but I think that's where that smell came from. Well, actually, we stood there and locked eyes for about a good 10 seconds. I'm sitting here, my jaw in the water trying to figure out what the hell this is.
Were you petrified?
Yeah. I don't know if I was. I don't know if I was more shocked than anything else. And after about 10 minutes or so, this thing quickly turned and briskly walked up into the woods. Now, this sighting was more interesting for a lot of other reasons. When this happened, I got in my car and drove into Sykesville, which was about a mile away. Got a phone at a booth and called the local cops, told them what I saw. And, you could hear snickering behind you, like, this guy's nuts. But the girl told me, she said, look, go back to the area where it happened. We'll have a police officer there. So I got in the car and went back. I figured I'm going to be standing out here for an hour waiting for this cop to show up, and I don't know if this thing's going to come back. So, but when I got there, there was a Maryland State Trooper already there. And he had a wooden barrier across the road. They used to use those wooden barriers back then. I pulled up to him. He came right to the window and said, you got to turn around and leave. And I said, well, I made a report of seeing something. I don't know if I said Bigfoot or not. He said, I don't care. You got to turn around and get out of here. So I wasn't going to argue with him. So I left.
Wow.
So after I went home, I was living in Sykesville at the time. I lived right down the road from there. So I got it. I turned around, went home. About an hour later, I thought, well, I'm going to go back down there and see what's going on. So when I got up it was River Road. When I got up there, I had to park about a quarter mile from where it was because there was cars everywhere. I mean, it was just cars everywhere. I walked up to the barrier, and there was a Howard County police officer there at that time. And I kind of acted dumb and asked him what happened. And he laughed and said, somebody said they saw a Bigfoot. I said, okay. Didn't tell him I was the one that saw it. And, I was watching, and God, they had people with dogs in and out of those weeds and forest and stuff. At least 8 or 9. It was a lot of them. There was a big white tent that was set up on the north bank where I'd seen this thing. As well, I could hear a helicopter. And back then, the federal government used to drive those black Wagoneers back then, and there were 2 of those sitting there as well. So it was feds, local, county, state, the whole 9 yards was there. Well, I later found out that there had been a report of a sighting downriver about 4 miles earlier that morning by a woman in Marysville, Maryland. And but that wouldn't have drawn all these government officials and stuff to look for this thing. People that are familiar with the Baltimore, Washington area, there's a lot of federal facilities that, we have no idea what they are. And that Patapsco River Valley has a lot of areas that have unknown structures, unknown facilities. And I think this thing probably escaped. I later talked to a Sykesville police officer who told me, he verified everything that happened. He never found out what it was all about. He knew that it was probably somebody had reported a Bigfoot. About 8 years before that, there had been a flap in and around the town along the river of what people called the Sykesville Monster. This was a Bigfoot creature that was actually breaking into homes, breaking into garages.
I heard of that.
Chicken pens, the whole thing. So when I had my encounter, I was lucky enough to find at work one of the gentlemen who lived down there and had family that had been affected by this thing. So I, with his encouragement and his introduction, I was able to interview all the witnesses that were still alive and several others as well. This community down there in that section of Sykesville was all African American. And in fact, when these sightings started, the Baltimore Afro-American newspaper were the ones that did the actual early investigation. And it was being printed up in the newspaper in the city. So because it being it was all African American witnesses. And but I was able to get some really interesting interviews. And boy, after that, I was hooked. That's when I really started getting involved with not only Bigfoot, but anything I thought was interesting.
So that was the beginning of
that's
your lifetime work.
Well, I had been investigating the paranormal ever since I was in high school. It's an interesting thing. I mean, I knew I was intuitive after I had an incident on the Gettysburg battlefield when I was like 9. And after that, I just, my heightened senses were kind of kicking in then. And even in high school, even though, you said somebody, you tell somebody you're a paranormal investigator, you get that real funny look, like, what the hell is that? Not like it is today.
Right. Back then it was different. Yeah,
absolutely. So, but that was just hauntings and spirit activity and such. But 81 is where I started with the cryptids, and it led to there. So,
and then you had another sighting in 88.
Yeah, in 88, I was actually down in Baltimore. I was living in Maryland then. I lived in Maryland for 40 years, then moved back up here. I was born and raised in this area. I'm not far from Gettysburg. And what happened was a friend of mine who I was in Boy Scouts in high school together happened to be there. There was some type of jamboree or something going on at an area called the Timonian Fairgrounds. Actually, it's where they had the state fair every year in Maryland. And I ran into him. And by dumb luck, so we're sitting there eating some lunch. And this guy used to hang out with me at Gettysburg at night. What we used to go out when you could get on the battlefield at night. We could we set up camp and go out there and see all kinds of crazy stuff, So he knew what I was into, but he knew nothing about the cryptids or anything. So, I told him about the Bigfoot encounter. So he said, "Well, look, we have something that's going on out at Camp Conewago. It's an old Boy Scout camp that these scouts are leaving campsites, breaking early and leaving because they hear screams. Have no idea what these screams are coming from. So
Wow.
he asked me if I wanted to come out and get involved and look for this thing. So I met them the next weekend, him and a friend of his. We walked into the woods right beside the creek and set up camp, had 3 tents, got everything in order. That night we heard something walking around. I thought it was one of them getting up to relieve himself or whatever it was. But in the morning we talked about it, and we always heard it, but it wasn't none of them. So, you figure, man, maybe it's a deer or something. We didn't know. So anyway, that day, this was a Saturday, we were looking all around the woods and stuff, and we were seeing nothing, nothing out of the ordinary. So we got back to camp about 6 o'clock, set up most evening, ate, talking about football. Actually, that's what we were talking about most of the night. And after a while, I guess about 11 o'clock, we heard this screaming sound. Now, we didn't know what it was. It could have been an animal. I thought maybe it might have been a rabbit or an owl, because they do make some horrific screams. Maybe even a bobcat. But about a half an hour later, we heard it again. Now, this time it sounded like a child or a woman screaming, and it was horrific. I mean, this thing is like coming in and out and in and out. And it's like, this thing is either moving fast, flying, or doing something. So we were on alert. So we sat there at the campfire for another hour or so. It was about 1 o'clock or so. And, I got up, stretched my legs, walked around a bit. I just had a funny feeling that something was watching us. You get that feeling. And so I went back. I told those guys, I said, look, let's grab our flashlights, go out onto the trail, which ran along the creek, and see if we come up with anything. So, we figured there's nothing out there. So we actually got our flashlight in a row, walking out into the trail. We weren't more than 50 foot away from the camp when we saw these red eyes in the creek. And this thing was standing in the middle of the creek. It was a bright moonlight that night, and the creek was really low that time of year. And by the time we got our flashlights on these red eyes, these red lights, or whatever the hell they were, this thing jettisoned into the air. I mean, a literal whooshing sound. And as it reached the apex, a couple seconds later, it screamed and then faded away. Well, we got back to camp quickly, and
I guess
my buddy was freaked. He wasn't even talking. The other guy asked me, did you see this thing on its back? And I did. I noticed some type of structure on its back, so I just figured it was wings. But we didn't see any wings unfurl or anything when it took off. And so my buddy wasn't talking. The only thing he says, I'm not sleeping out here tonight. I'm going to sleep up the administration building. So they went up there. I stayed out there that night because I wanted to see what the hell it was. But nothing ever showed up. Now, since that time, I have received reports about this ever since when I got on the blog. I started the blog in 2005. So in 2008, which is 20 years later, I decided to write about this on there. And when I wrote about it, I started getting inquiries from people around the area. One guy living at Dick's Dam said he had been hearing that thing for over 20 years. What the hell it was. Still going on. Had a scoutmaster tell me that he and his troops were out there about a month or so before I'd written the thing, and the kids came running back off down the trail and said there was a dragon in the trail. Well, he thought they were pulling his leg, and he didn't really take it serious, but they were really shook up. So when he read my account, he knew they were telling him the truth. As well, that Conewago Creek actually runs a little west and back east towards the Susquehanna River. And I have had 4 other sightings over the years from people along the creek who have seen the same being. So, the last sighting was about 4 years ago. So there's definitely something around there.
I guess. Be nice to set up about 15 trail cameras.
Yeah.
Wow. I've got a question in chat. Was there a sighting at O'Hare 3 days ago?
Not 3 days ago, but, there have been witnesses coming forward since the 22nd sighting of July. There could very well have been a sighting 3 days ago, but we haven't heard about it.
Okay. Are there any other, say, cryptid or Mothman hot spots besides right around the O'Hare Airport and that cemetery you spoke of?
Yeah, I mean, they in the city there have been hot spots in the past. There have particular neighborhoods where there have been a lot of sightings. As well, we recently had 2 sightings in the Milwaukee area. In particular, there was a sighting in Racine, and we had one at the Wisconsin State Fair, which made the Milwaukee papers about a week ago. And of course, they tried to make it sound like there was a demon out there, but we got a pretty good witness report, and we also got a report today, which we're waiting to talk to the witness who also saw the same being at the Wisconsin State Fair. So, we're constantly getting reports, and we're following up on them, and as they come in, we'll go ahead and report it, put it out there for everybody to look at.
Do you know if anybody on the Great Lakes, say in boats, have seen any of these types of winged creatures?
I only know of one. And this was pretty close to Montrose Beach, which is, I guess they're about 5 or 6 miles out into the lake, where a woman and her friends had seen a pair of these things literally circling above the boat. And it was at nighttime.
Wow.
But they saw the silhouettes of these 2 things literally doing figure 8s above the boat.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, but we've had a lot of sightings along the lake. I mean, the Lakeshore Drive, Navy Pier, down there by some of the museums, the aquarium, areas near the Soldier Field, and yeah, there's been a lot of sightings along the waterfront.
All righty. Let's talk about this right now. Well, this book, Mothman Dynasty. Is that your latest book?
That's my first book about the phenomena.
Okay.
I published this at the end of 2017. It takes from the beginning up until the last sighting in October of 2017. The sighting started to wane, so I thought that here's the time to start writing. I thought maybe the cold water and the cold weather would stop these sightings, which it didn't, because it continued on later on. So I wrote a lot about the phenomena, the Mothman phenomena, and some other cases that seemed similar to what was going on. I had the task force that was working on the phenomena. Literally, I had each one of them write something about what they thought this thing was. And it's a chronological assessment of what people had been seeing and what I thought may have happened. So, yeah, it's the original book about it.
Okay, and then we've got this one, Winged Cryptids.
And that was the follow-up. That was my last book, and I wrote about the phenomena from the early part of 2018 up until the early part of 2000, before the COVID started. And, it starts to encompass some of the airport sightings. But, I may end up having to write another book about this if this keeps going, because we're really heavily invested into the O'Hara sightings, and we plan on doing some very intensive work. I said before, possibly metaphysical, maybe remote viewing, other things. We're going to have to kind of look outside the box on this one, I think. And so far, we're getting some interesting results.
That would be very interesting to hear about, especially the remote viewing part. I'm extremely interested in to see what kind of luck you have with that. And then we have this book, Alien Disclosure.
I have been involved with the alien abduction scenario with witnesses, clients, and such for many years. And this book entails most of those cases I have actually worked on. Includes the David Eckhart case with his encounters, which continue to this day in Pensacola, Florida. There's a story early on about the encounter and ultimate permanent abduction of a woman out in eastern Washington State. She's never shown up. We have kept tabs of that, and she was literally abducted.
Just gone.
Gone.
Wow.
And, there's other things in there, other phenomena. I talk about other connections to the paranormal that may very well be extraterrestrial. For instance, Men in Black, some other things that may also be involved.
Mm-hmm.
But I kind of opened myself up on this early on, talking about my personal abduction I had years ago, right after my wife passed away, and some of the things I was shown. I don't go deeply into it because I had an encounter back in April this year, which, quite frank, I still haven't figured out yet. So I'm working on that. Maybe it'll come to me. I don't know. It's the same beings, very similar scenario, but I am just trying to work through that right now.
Yeah, and that's difficult.
Yeah, it is. It really is.
It's a strange phenomena. Well, Lon, I want to thank you so much for taking time out of your very busy schedule to be with us this evening. I appreciate it. And I hope you will come back again soon.
No problem. Just ask me and I'll be there.
All right. This is Margie K with Unnext News Radio and Podcast, and we'll see you next week.
You've been listening to the Unnext News Podcast with Margie K. Any rebroadcast or duplication of this program or its content without express written permission from Margie K. is strictly prohibited. The Unnext News Podcast, in direct cooperation with the internet website margiek.com.